Chapter 32, Section 9, Tetanus and Gas Gangrene. Tetanus, it's serious. It's a life-threatening disease that we do not see that often here in the States. Why? Because one of the vaccines you're commonly going to be offered is the tetanus vaccine. Going to go get your tetanus shot. You ever show up at the ER? They're going to ask you, when was your last tetanus shot? Have you had a tetanus shot within the last 7 years? Seems that after 5 years it starts to wane, and they pretty much think that for the average person by 7 years the immune response to it's waned enough that they'll give you a booster. So even if you know you've had it in the past 7 years, they'll still offer it. Hey, let's just go ahead and give you the booster. That way we know now. So anyone who's not been immunized, they're the ones at risk. What we know is that Clostridium tetani, our causative agent, this is the bacteria that causes it, produces an exotoxin. We've talked about this in one of the previous chapters. This exotoxin interferes with the nerve signal that tells the muscles to relax, tells the nerve cell that's at the neuromuscular juncture to stop releasing acetylcholine, which tells the muscle to contract. So you get what's a spastic paralysis. The muscles will start to contract, and they will contract and constrict and constrict and contract to the point where you're now rigid. Now, Clostridium tetanus is another soil microbe. Okay, it's an endospore soil microbe. You don't ingest it. That's Clostridium botulinum, and that's a different chapter. Here, you're generally going to get poked or cut by something. Used to be the old wives' tales. If you get poked or cut by a rusty nail or some rusty metal, you're going to get tetanus. And it's not the rust; it's the soil, the soil particles that were caught in the iron oxide of the rust that's going to flake off and carry with it the soil particle into the wound, which on that soil particles is going to be the Clostridium tetani endospores. And it's not a surface cut, because as you're walking around all day long, you're going to get cut, scratches, no big deal. So it's got to be typically a deep puncture. It's got to get down below the epidermis into the dermal layer, if not deeper. Clostridium tetani, once it gets down into those deeper tissues, it's going to germinate. Once it germinates, now the vegetative cell is going to start producing tetanotoxin, that exotoxin, tetanotoxin. Paralysis is going to set in. It's not going to be an overall, I'm now paralyzed. It's going to be this slow, depending on a person, slowish, quickish, as things just start, or their jaw starts to clench. They just can't, and they start to crumple over as they're going. So I've seen this happen, I remember as a kid, and people, because their parents didn't keep them up on, their vaccines. If you take a smear of and you look at, you'll see that it does take on what they call this clubbed shape. It's an oh shoot, I can't remember the term now. This club shape is diagnostic of the vegetative cells. This atypical shape, that once it gets into deep wounds and the endospore germinates, you start getting the vegetative cells producing the exotoxin, and this is what happens. You see in this young individual, don't know patient's boy or girl, doesn't matter. What you see is that different muscle groups are going to start going through the spastic paralysis at different rates, which is why They're arching their back, it's off to the side, lumbar's going, the leg muscles are starting to go, and whatnot. It is very, very painful. Imagine having a head to toe and everywhere in between, body-wide Charlie horse. That's basically what this feels like, but it's a Charlie horse turned up to 11. Another endospore, soil endospore, that's going to get into deep tissue wounds is Clostridium perfringens. Clostridium perfringens is an anaerobic bacteria. It's an obligate anaerobe, means it does not like oxygen. So it can't be shallow wounds because it won't germinate. And if it does germinate, it's going to die within minutes. So it's going to have to be a deep puncture down into the muscular tissue. It's going to germinate in the muscular tissue while it is oxygenated. It's lower levels than atmosphere. And once perfringens starts destroying due to proteolysis, it has different enzymes and toxins that it's going to produce. Blood flow into that region is going to cease. So it's now going to go from a low oxygen level to a no oxygen level very quickly. So it's going to get in deep tissue due to trauma, probably some form of a puncture wound. Antibiotic treatment works great at killing off the Clostridium perfringens bacteria. Nowadays they do hyperbaric oxygen, put them in the hyperbaric chamber, put them under high oxygen concentration, a couple of atmospheres of pressure, going to superoxygenate the blood, and it's going to get into the tissues. Make the oxygen level in the tissues too high for this obligate anaerobe to survive. Because of the proteolysis and because of the damage, the lack of blood flow into certain areas, especially around the wound, well, you're going to have a lot of necrotic tissue. And remember, I've said it in many lectures throughout this course, necrotic tissues in one place, finger, hand, whatever, will induce necrosis and death of neighboring tissue. So even if just the fingertip here is necrotic, black, it's going to spread. This is going to die pretty soon because of toxic substances. Due to the death of these cells are going to interfere with blood flow here, causing this to die. Then this, then this, then this. So they're going to be very liberal with what they remove. They're not only going to remove the black tissue, the necrotic tissue, but they're going to go through and do a pretty big cut around to make sure they get everything that's dead, almost dead, and will be dying soon. Now, it turns out the gas gangrene due to Clostridium perfringens, yes, is number one. But there's also another species that we associate with gas gangrene from the genus Clostridium. And they both cause relatively similar diseases. The symptoms and the signs that you'll see in the ER in the hospital are the same. The only way we differentiate the two is we look at the Gram stain, a stained slide. Clostridium perfringens, you see here, doesn't have that club shape that we saw previously with botulinum, but Clostridium novii, as you see here, this is just a saffron stain. It's not a Gram stain. Clostridium novii is highly flagellated, where Clostridium perfringens, non-flagellated. So that's really the only difference between the two. The disease and the way they cause the disease is pretty much spot on the same.